We have some candidates that are seeking us, just from having spoken to their references, and I think Mrs. Coach can agree on that. And then the addition of bringing youth apprentices and partnering up with Wilmot to bring in high school kids who are eager, who are in their induction to teaching program, who want to jump in our amazing profession and continue it. What better place to learn and grow than here? So a lot of great discussion, a lot of great work by the board. So I appreciate and respect everything you guys discuss and your vision for increasing salaries and supporting our teachers.
I just like to recognize too your work and the work of Mr. Stellbacher to put that together. That was really helpful.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think to Luke's point, made it easy to digest, right? So, kudos to you guys for that.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? I'll entertain a motion to approve the salary increases on line 7A.
I would like to make a motion to approve the 26-27 salary increases as discussed.
Thank you. Motion by Mike Gentile, seconded by Joe Hurst. All approve?
Aye.
Any nays? Okay. Approve contracts for teachers and administrative assistants.
That's just, again, yearly requirement, just to make sure we put that on there just as we wanted to make sure that we had approval from the board on the administrative contracts and also the assurances for our employees. Obviously, there's state statute and timeline for those. We want to get those out as soon as possible and to make sure our staff has time to sign them. We've already reached out to them, which is standard practice, to get just a email indicating their willingness to return, which everybody does. It's pretty normalized here, so we just have to give the district and school the ability to move forward and issue contracts and assurances for the next two agenda items.
Can B and C be approved in the same motion?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll make a motion to approve contracts for teachers and administrative assistants as well as approve assurance letters for hourly employees.
Second.
Motion by Joe Hurst, seconded by Luke Hamilton. All approve?
Aye.
Any noes? Okay. Motion carried. All right, so the E-rate bids.
We were up E-rate. Thank you to Mr. Hurst who let me know, I think week 3, when we first had our onboarding meeting, and that conversation went well. We, our Bruce, our free consultant, he manages the process, contracts with another vendor who then manages the E-rate, just so anybody knows what E-rate is. As you pay for your internet and cable and phone, if you have that, there's other fees attached to it. That's federal support for schools to expand and ensure that all schools have quality access to internet and Wi-Fi. In a nutshell, that's it. What we're very fortunate in the past, our previous E-rate rate was 40% reimbursement from the state. It is now 50% reimbursement from the state. So what we pay as we increase the amount, I believe we went from 500 meg to at least 1 or 2 gig of internet speed and bandwidth coming in here. We get reimbursed, and those bills are processed at 50% moving forward. I shared with you the approval process and the evaluation. As you can see, Bruce does a very thorough job. That then goes to someone else. Bruce evaluates it based on the E-rate table and calculations, and then CompuNet was the bid. As you go through that, I'll do my best to answer all your questions about the specific items in there, and if you have any. And then in addition, some of that E-rate dollars will go towards the CompuNet contract for managing it, and that's a part of E-rate that's called MIBS, and that's the portion where you can pay your MSP or a contractor to manage your internet. So I will say this, and I've grown to really get to know and appreciate Bruce. I know his introduction to staff in our school was a kind of unusual and abrupt, because what leading exec and leader from Johnson Controls, Northwest Mutual, there you go, sorry. wants to volunteer to help a school out, but he's very passionate about not getting paid to help schools out. And he's a good man who cares about us, and I appreciate the fact that he is not afraid to confront CompuNet and ask them a lot of questions and hold them accountable on behalf of our school district. And he wants no thank yous, and if you see him, his mother just passed away. So she was battling dementia. So,
Okay, so any comments, questions?
I found a couple of points that Bruce called out in the documentation that I wonder if we need answered before we can vote on it. One was that CompuNet requires a 5-year agreement, I believe, but E-rate is only renewed annually.
Mhm.
So I don't know how, and CompuNet has a contract clause that says it's contingent on E-rate funding, I think. Bruce mentioned that we should probably get that.
Bruce and I had that conversation. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we did have that conversation. And I think I would strongly recommend this board approves it as a 1-year contract.
Okay. Oh, instead of the 5 years?
Yeah, correct.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would.
Because it says it's contingent upon board approval.
Yeah, I don't know if it had to be a 5-year.
No.
or if it could be.
No, I think that's a smart move, because I think on behalf of the district, when you look at our IT services, I think knowing we're contracting with a provider, that should be a a yearly discussion, if not bi-yearly, on whether this is not any negative assessment of CompuNet, but I think we should be doing our due diligence on behalf of our school, staff, district, and taxpayers to make sure that we are getting the best deal, service, and highest ROI.
The other point he called out was on the new devices that we're purchasing, and he said that they actually have the device on the end of sale of 2025. So he just recommended that we confirm that we can get the devices and that it's still going to support it. So I guess if we were able to confirm that, CompuNet. Yeah, it seems silly to think that they would offer something that they can't get.
Yeah, I agree.
But I thought it was an interesting point.
Yeah. It kind of echoes the point that he does push back on
Yeah.
Amber. I think she'd prefer he's not at meetings,
And then he digs
which
into the
I find is,
details.
just to be honest with you, because that's who I am. It's super entertaining. So if anyone else ever needs an entertainment moment, feel free to come in. So
But those are the only concerns. I thought that the assessment was great. It seems like comprehensive.
Thank you, Luke. Any other comments or discussion? So how do you want us to?
I think I would approve the CompuNet proposal as a 1 year. And if we have to, we'll inform them that we can approve it every year from there on out.
I make a motion to approve the E-rate bid with the amendment item 3, either as added from 5 years to 1.
Okay, motion by Joe Hurst, second. I'll second that. So motion by Joe Hurst, seconded by Vicky Gallage, all approved? Aye. Any noes? Any abstain? Okay. On to public comments. Do we have any public comments? All right. School board training. Welcome, Ryan.
All right, thanks. I'll stand up here with you guys.
Whatever's comfortable for you.
So first of all, good evening, familiar faces, but for the new board member, my name is Ryan Hyden. I'm the school district's legal counsel. Nice to meet you. Welcome aboard. Hopefully you find this to be very fulfilling. I'm here tonight because, first of all, thank you. I think this is a good testament to your commitment. I would just say that not every board is wanting and willing to learn. So I would just commend you guys for even having this presentation in the first place. Really, my purpose here tonight is to be a resource for you guys. So while I am presenting, certainly if there's things you guys have questions about, whether I'm hitting on it or not, I'm certainly happy to address those questions. So feel free to just shoot your hand up, chime in whenever you see fit. With that, I do have a lot before us, but I plan to drive over some of them pretty cursory. So don't be intimidated about the fact that there'll be a lot of slides, and I'll just kind of keep moving along here as we go.
73 to be exact.
Yes, exactly. So if you want, I can click too if that's easier
No,
for you. It's up to you.
no,
So.
I will get tired.
Okay, perfect. So The agenda tonight, as like, why we have 73 slides, is because we've got 3 different topics that I think are really core and relevant to you guys. Some of them are more so, less so, but they're all critical at various points. So first, we're going to talk about board governance. Really, what is the role as the board, the authority, and also at the end of the day, why are you here versus administration? I find that having that core understanding on both levels is really helpful for everyone as you guys work through your day-to-day duties. Then I'll get into the open meetings law, everyone's favorite, but again, important just to have some basic understandings there, the do's, the don'ts. And then lastly, we'll cover public records law and things you guys should understand as office holders and the things that you have to comply with and all that fun stuff. So with that, if you want to just advance this here, Chris, we'll get to board governance. So first and foremost, just understanding the structure of a school district is important as you sit on a board. So the authority, when you guys look, if you ever have interest to figure out where is it that we as a board derive authority to do or not do things, is really often going to come from Chapter 120 of the Wisconsin statute. So that's a spot where, for example, if you're dealing with expulsions, it's 120.13 and various other types of issues. When we talk about teacher and administrator contracts, like you guys were just referencing, that's going to be Chapter 118. And so it's really going to be 115 through 121, but I would argue 118 and 120 are the key ones you guys should generally be aware of and reading if and when it interests you. Now, the key thing to understand is that you guys are a body, and so that means that in a couple different ways you act in a corporate fashion, and also you act as a body, not individuals. So in that sense, you can sue and be sued. And so don't ever be surprised if at some point the district would be sued. It would be the board that would be mentioned or named. It would be you individually as a board member. It doesn't mean you personally have to pay out of your coffers. It just means you're serving as an official capacity on behalf of a corporate entity. Now, because of that, you guys as a board are limited by statute. So some governmental entities like cities, for example, have really, really broad powers where it's set up that they have what are called police authorities, and they can essentially do anything that's in the safety and welfare of the citizens. You're the opposite of that. You are a creature that's basically created, and it's only if you have authority within a statute that you can do something. If you don't, you're limited and you can't do it. Obviously, as you guys know, you govern the district. However, importantly, and I'll harp on this repeatedly tonight, so I apologize, but it's the board as a whole that governs the district. It's not any one of you individuals at any given point, and that's whether you're the president, vice president, clerk, treasurer, or the member at large. Each of you have distinct functions and roles, as we'll talk about. But it's really critical that you understand that at no point in time can any one of you bind the district or act on behalf of the district. Doesn't mean you can't talk or speak on issues, as we'll go through, but that's a key limitation. If you want to go to the next slide, Chris. So here, that being said, understand that your powers are ultimately very broad. So one of the statutory grants is that you can do all things reasonable to promote education. And so there is the ability to, generally speaking, do a number of things that you may not otherwise do. With that being said, there's 38 separate grants. I'm not going to go through them for obvious reasons, but just understand that there's a lot of things that are called out, whether it be creating hunting in school forests or purchasing the sale property, a lot of things you may not anticipate. And so if there ever are discussions or issues that you guys want to look into, understand it very well may be the case that it's contemplated already in the law. Additionally, as statute sets forth, you guys as the board have to ultimately develop curriculum, course requirements, instructions. That's something that you have a core responsibility over. So it's not to say that administration is going to play a large role in that, but statutorily, that's one of the key functions that you guys play, and that's you should serve an important function with it. Next slide, please. And so just getting into what are some of your actual duties here. So again, just kind of giving you some flavor for the purposes of the school board. So specifically, it's the care for, possession of, management, the actual affairs of the district. And again, very broad, as you can see there. And that may include visiting and examining schools in the district, et cetera, evaluating effectiveness, all of those good things. Now, what I would argue is that while, yes, you can examine the school, I would not necessarily suggest that any one of you come in and do, for example, personal reviews. Really what I think this is contemplating, you'd be surprised what I've seen. So what I would recommend is you view this as more of a, we're going to work with administration to get the information we need to examine, to advise, to look at how our staff is doing things. And it may be that there's, joint exercises you guys engage in there. But the point of this statutory provision is that at the end of the day, while the administrator serves as the day-to-day operator of the district, the buck stops with you guys if you feel the effectiveness of teachers, the way that the overall curriculum is going isn't working out. That's your function. Next slide, please. Obviously, keeping the school board building and grounds in good repair is going to be one of your key functions. So obviously, as you guys talk about a number of things, even tonight here with your IT, it's again, one of the reasons that you're dealing with that, it falls right within your wheelhouse. So anytime you're dealing with an issue of significance in that regard, oftentimes, unless you've given a really broad grant of authority to the administrator or otherwise, these things come back to you, and you as a board need to generally address them, deal with them, etc. Additionally, insurance, all the other fun things, that's why it comes before you as well. It's you guys that have the statutory duty to actually deal with these things. And so while, again, administration brings the information to you, the reason you have to vote on it is by statute. It's a requirement. So on the next slide here, we have some other important duties, again, just to kind of hit them. Soliciting healthcare bids is actually a statutory duty. Again, your school hours, you'll know every year, again, if you've been here long enough, you do the calendar every year, you set all of that. These are all things, again, that you're really set forth responsible for, here by statute. Now, the top one is an important one as well. This is generally going to be your annual meeting. Again, if you've been here for a number of years, you've been through the levy, setting it, that's what that's in reference to. It's typically, again, your ability, your authority to set the levy limit within certain reasonable parameters, but to determine how much funding is going to come from the local community and what that's going to look like. Heading into the next here, this is where it gets kind of into the more specifics here for each of you. And again, just some of the really important points that I've seen just practically working with boards over the years. Number one here, again, is what I've already hit, but just reinforcing it. By policy, you guys as a board, and this is really important, you've said, not necessarily you as a whole, but the prior boards, that this policy is one you're going to adopt and follow, and that's true for all the things we're going to cover tonight. Now, to that point, before I get into this, what I would say is, to me, that suggests certainly follow it, but also if you disagree with the policy, understand as a board, you can always change the policy. So if there are things tonight I go through or that you run into as a board member or as a collective that you think don't make sense, that can be changed, understand you definitely can do that. But for now, tonight, what I'm referencing is the policies you guys as a whole previously have said, yep, we like those, we're going to follow those, we think they make sense. With that in mind, collectively, and I would agree with this one, prior boards have said, and you continue to agree, that individual board members do not have actual authority unless provided by law. So you guys, again, and it makes sense to do this, have not given individual board members the authority to do any particular thing on behalf of the district. I think that's important because sometimes you will have in smaller districts or even bigger ones, people who have been there for a long time, they have particular political powers, sways, etc. And if they get into a particular role, they have authorities, all of a sudden they're not really acting on the behalf of the electorate or the collective. They're kind of taking their own personal vendetta or agenda, whatever you want to call it, and running with it. It can be extremely toxic. So I think this one is very important and it makes a lot of sense as to why it exists. Likewise, you guys have said under policy that the board president is basically your spokesperson. So if the board as a whole, and again, this is the concept, is going to speak as a body, it's the board president that you, by policy, said is going to do that. Now, your policy also explicitly says that individual board members, of course, you are citizens, can make statements, but you have to be clear and explicitly state you're not speaking on behalf of the board. So you're not limited in speaking out. You just have to make it clear that you're speaking in your own personal capacity and that it's not a board decision or statement that's being issued. Now, in that respect, understand the board president also, of course, speaks when the board votes and authorizes it. So it's not to say that the board president just automatically can go out and make statements on behalf of the board. Again, this is all based on collective action. Next slide, please. So who are the school board officials? You guys know this, but just to cover it, by statute, and again, this is why you voted tonight, you have to have 4 different positions: president, vice president, treasurer, and clerk. For some larger boards, of which you are not, they do establish other random positions which are voluntary, but you have to have these offices, and therefore, again, that's why you have, despite having a 5-person board, 4 different offices. So we'll run through here next the various powers that you guys actually have, and again, these are by statute. Basically, the only takeaway, I won't read all of these, is just understand that each of these positions have unique, distinct powers, and I'll be honest, they're a lot less significant than you probably would imagine. And again, the reason for this is because by statute, the legislature said to you guys that, hey, individual folks on the board shouldn't really have all that much authority. It's the board as a whole that has to act. So really, we're talking to the president signing of checks, maybe defending in certain litigation if they are the spokesperson or to serve in that regard. And then again, obviously chairing the board member or the board meetings, that happen. Those are really, at the end of the day, the key statutory functions. Beyond that, being president is just, the list of these things in the title, essentially. This by policy, so getting beyond statute, again, you basically just kind of regurgitate, which is again good, the statutory policies and various rights. So understand that this very much mirrors what the statute says. And so again, really the key one here from a practicality standpoint being acting as the chairperson of the various meetings. And then of course, ensuring meeting minutes are properly recorded, approved, and signed. The vice president, there are no distinct statutory duties, but the reason that this position exists is because at the end of the day, there are obviously going to be moments the president can't be here, incapacity, unavailability, vacation, whatever it might be. And therefore, someone needs to be able to step in and then assume the powers and duties of the president, and thus there goes the vice president. And so there may also be some other duties as the policy at some point could indicate if you guys wanted to assign them, but at the end of the day, really this position is there for the vacancy issue that may ultimately arise. The treasurer, on the other hand, does have some specific duties that are unique to it. And so, for example, this long laundry list here, basically it's coming back to applying for any kind of collection or monetary disbursement. The clerk, or excuse me, the treasurer is going to be overseeing that. There's also the keeping of some basic rudimentary account books that have to be done. And again, it's any kind of disbursement under sub 3 there. And then really at the last one is presenting at the annual meeting a written statement of all money received and dispersed by the treasurer of that last year. So not anything over the top, but yet some specific duties. And again, just some very specific obligations here when it comes to when funds are withdrawn, distributed, received, etc. How is it that we are to go about actually putting that money away and recording of those transfers? So then policy, again, very much mirroring what the statute says, which is what we want. Just again, stating that you're going to enter into your various books all the monies you receive, reimburse, that you're going to ultimately deposit things timely, etc. And then at the annual meeting, you're going to give that spiel I just mentioned about the money received and dispersed. So the clerk, final one here, is ultimately, probably in ironic fashion, the one that has maybe the most significant duties under statute, because you're the one that has some of the signatory duties on various contracts and orders for the district. And you would also be the person that generally during meetings is going to record various minutes and things of that fashion if necessary. And so this is a very important position, and particularly at the annual meeting and special meeting, they serve a unique function of recording the proceedings as well. So again, important that you have this role. And then on the next slide here, we'll have the policy obligations as well, excuse me, statutory, but then policy. And here again, it's just really stating forth that there's a certified statement on this one of the taxes. This is where from the annual meeting, the clerk will ultimately take the information back to your locality and work with them. So again, a lot of legalese here. And same thing here, we can just skip to the next one. So board functions, what is the board function? This is really the key thing to focus on tonight here, and we talk about the roles. And that is that you are obviously here, you're voted in by the public, and therefore you're here to involve and be representable to their interests. And so obviously all of you can come to this with your own unique personal views and experiences, but at the end of the day, it's important, I find, when you're dealing with conflict and dealing with tough decisions, to just remember that you're here on behalf of the larger public, and that you're here to ultimately, at the end of the day, work together to have a more effective educational environment. That being said, you're also here to hold staff accountable and make sure that they implement policies. So as I just read to you guys, you have your own policies that govern you. You also have a whole litany of policies that you've approved over the years that govern staff. And so it's very important that in the future, to the extent you find out about deviations from policy, that you guys ensure that that doesn't happen, that you correct that type of stuff, and that you're making sure everybody is on board with that. Chris obviously plays a very large role in that too. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the policies you guys implement, that you're saying as a whole, are important to the district, that people are actually following them. Failure to do that can really put you guys in a bad spot as a district, because if you're not following your own policies, if and when a lawsuit comes, for obvious reasons, it becomes very easy for the person to make that look quite bad and to point to the fact that you're deviating from accepted practices, etc. So that one is particularly important, and I just wanted to highlight that if, again, you become aware of those issues, you really focus on it. The last point is important, and that really is just that your role is to enact policy. You are not here, and I think you guys know this, but to be doing the day-to-day minutia of checking in with staff, and that's where I know we were joking earlier, but I have seen folks legitimately come in and sit up from the board in classrooms, observe teachers, do these kind of crazy things. They think that, for better or worse, my role is to manage the district. I have all this authority, and while they are correct in a very certain way, they're incorrect in another way. And I would argue that if your goal is to actually do the things that we just discussed of forwarding good educational practices and policies, working outside of the realm of policy really is counterintuitive to that ultimate goal. Yes.
So we're not talking about showing up and being present at events, and we're
No.
talking about inserting ourselves into the day-to-day operation.
Correct. Yep. So, and I'll give you some more examples that might be more realistic because that one's a little bit outlandish. But, so for example, board members that would say, hey, I want to come sit in on this particular staff meeting. And there are certainly, to be clear, instances and examples where the board as a whole might decide, yeah, we need someone there for that. But I'm talking about a person who on their own, without a board decision and discussion, just decides, you know what, I got Tuesday off. I'm just going to go into district offices and kind of see what Chris is up to and mosey around and poke around in the school and say hey to the teachers and talk to the students because I just want to get a feel for what's going on. That, believe it or not, is a much more common phenomenon than you realize. And again, while there's a certain place for maybe that being in a very limited fashion of, hey, I want to just check out for an hour what's going on, the reality is that that kind of behavior is generally much more indicative of other larger problems. So that's the kind of stuff that when I talk about kind of getting involved in the day-to-day minutia, I would recommend not getting involved with, essentially, if that makes sense. So that being said, kind of now on the other side of the coin, what's the authority of the superintendent? So obviously you guys and the superintendent, you guys are tied at the hip in terms of a working relationship. So it's really important that you have a common understanding of what the role of Chris is versus what you guys do. And so from that standpoint, really just to simplify it, under the statutes, but also contract, Chris's role, whether it be Chris or any other district administrator, is to come in and have the general supervision and management of both your professional staff and then also your students. And so when we talk about who's got the reins every single day here, making sure that things are going in the right direction, that's your superintendent. They're the ones that, to the extent you guys as a board have concerns about, hey, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we checking into that? Why aren't we working with vendors to ask these questions? It's generally, I would recommend that you work through whether it be Chris or other administrative staff that come to these meetings, and that you guys understand that they're a conduit to bring you the information for decisions to be made. That being said, in a lot of instances, it will be the case that you have recommendations brought to you guys for maybe important decisions that by statute you are the ones to make. So examples of that could be teacher terminations, non-renewals. By statute, in both instances, you do have to be the body that makes those decisions. But ultimately, as you guys know, it's not going to be the case, especially for non-renewals, where if there are a large volume of them for one reason or another, maybe economic issues, you're not going to have the ability to get into the weeds on all of the prep work and the review. And so that's where administration comes into play. They do that prep work. They bring it to you with information. You talk about it. You become educated. And when you feel comfortable, you make the decision that you need to make. But again, it's really just understanding that it's the authority, or excuse me, the superintendent rather, that does that and brings it to you. That's likewise set out in policy. So again, you guys have recognized this in your own policies. The chief administrative officer is what you call the position. And again, that really just means kind of, your effective CEO doing all the day-to-day things. So again, just really simplifying it, the board is really, if you want to think about it, you're the what and the why of the district. You think about the theory, the bigger picture. You're trying to drive the district in a larger direction. And then you're asking the administrative staff here, through Chris and otherwise, to do the where, when, and how, kind of the run with it, figure out the details, make it happen type thing. That's kind of the division of labor that you should think about when you picture yourself as a board, and what's our role versus where is administration involved. Again, just breaking it down even more for just more examples. So policy, the what, will the district, for example, contract with, whether it be the PD, the SRO, or otherwise, or for example, will SROs benefit from this overall educational mission of the district? Are we going to take away something positive policy-wise? On the other hand, if you're dealing with this issue from Chris's perspective, it's going to be, who's the SRO actually going to be? What school hours, for example, might they be here? And which specific SROs am I going to ask the police department or sheriff's office to bring over for us? So you can see kind of, again, through that practical example of the larger policy considerations versus the day-to-day minutia and how that breaks down. So why, again, following policy matters. I hit on this earlier, but just a few other pieces on it. So beyond the liability piece, it also, frankly, is the credibility issue. So the whole classic, rules for thee but not for me thing, it is true, it's an issue, especially if it's open and obvious to anybody here working at the district. It's very hard to enforce for whether it be staff, students, or otherwise to say, we're going to hold you accountable through discipline, expulsions, whatever, because you didn't follow policy, but ultimately you at the same time as the board aren't doing the same. So that's a big, just practical issue to be wary of. And again, if you want to have just kind of an effective school environment, from my experience, that's a really important one to have, that credibility with your staff. The liability piece of it all, again, making sure that you have a legal defense, just to get a little further into that, having policies you follow is critical. At the end of the day, if there ever was a claim from someone, that is what's called Section 1983 claim. So they would try to bring a claim to pierce the immunity that you guys have. What your defense is going to be is to say that essentially, no, we don't have a well-established policy to violate someone's constitutional rights. And the way you can point to that is whatever your policy actually is. And so by sticking to your policy, following it, you're essentially, without knowing it, you're keeping yourself on the straight and narrow here for when or if a claim were ever filed. And then, of course, just practically, again, you're creating confusion, frankly, for those who are looking at the policies, because if we don't follow what we have in writing, it's very hard then for folks to go, well, what's the expectation? What am I really supposed to do here? And then the last one, again, practical but important, is that it can ultimately undermine your objectives. So if you do have a sticky expulsion, termination, discipline issue, or whatever it might be, sometimes, and frankly, it's often those scenarios that it happens more regularly, you go to deal with the problem and then you realize, whoops, we've got an issue because we didn't follow this, that, or the other thing, and we're going to end up having to bring this person back, or we have a problem in another area. So again, just to not shoot yourself in the foot, proverbially speaking, you want to make sure that you follow policy. This is another one, just kind of getting to the question earlier of, when is it that you'd be overstepping your bounds? And so this is where you guys, as again, a board, have laid out a desired path to not do that. Board staff communications is a big one. And often it's not you guys, to be honest, that's going to violate this. It's always staff that try to end around Chris that come to you guys with concerns. So frankly, what you need to understand here in this policy is just that communications are supposed to go through the chain of command from individual staff members to ultimately the superintendent, then through the board. So this is not something that, again, while individuals aren't precluded from contacting you, it's just that they need to go through the right steps to get there. It will be chaos and havoc otherwise if you have individual folks reaching out and kind of trying to forward various agendas. You're also going to get half the story and you're not going to fully understand because, again, you're not here day to day. They are. Chris is here. It's just the classic game of telephone. So to the extent you get those contacts, my practical recommendation would be say, hey, I really appreciate you reaching out. I'm going to direct you over to Chris. He can work with you on getting this resolved. If Chris needs to, he'll involve the board and get us back into the loop on whatever needs to happen. So it's not that we're ignoring them. It's just we're putting them back into the right path. So again, just at the end of the day, it's just kind of a practical question here of if you have a board member that wants to go to the director of finance or to the business manager here and say, hey, I want you to compile this very specific report. I want all these details and I want it just for me so I can review it and then maybe come to a board meeting and have some issues with it. No, you ultimately under your own policy can't make such a request. Again, I'm not saying any of you would, but I've seen this in other districts where people monopolize staff members' time because they have a concern or issue, and then they go ahead and they ask for staff to pull all kinds of data and issues. And so to the extent that you ever have an issue like that, again, it's really incumbent on you guys to bring it forward at a board meeting, have that request made to the staff through the board, not, again, just individually reaching out and saying, hey, I need you to spend your whole Friday putting together all these various public records that I could otherwise obtain in another fashion. So why does this all matter? I've hit on some of this, but frankly, if you don't adhere to a lot of these principles, all these various bad outcomes can occur. And again, I've seen them happen in real time. Some of them little, some of them big, like time spent on the trivial. That may seem like a minor deal, but if you have staff, for example, like I just noted, spending hours on gathering of information that really doesn't benefit anything in the long run, you are now spending time not doing other things and other issues fall behind, and that accumulates over time. You also burn folks out, honestly, whether that be administration or staff, so it's an issue from a retention standpoint. Nobody wants to work with bosses that they feel like are overstepping their bounds, just like you want the administrator to respect his role, vice versa. And so that's another big point at the end of the day, is just on the overall effectiveness of the district. It does make a big impact. Additionally, there's a reactivity versus proactivity issue that I see. So if you don't follow through with this process, you guys are going to be, again, like I said, flying from the seat of your pants on a lot of these issues. You're not going to have the full set of information. By empowering and working through the proper chains, you actually get the information you need, and you're going to be able to act with the proper info that you have. And then again, obviously, you don't want folks viewing that they have control of board agendas, whether that be staff or other board members that are kind of rogue. Understand how you guys actually operate in that respect. And if you have people who want items on the agenda, respect your process and have it come through generally the president who's going to create that board agenda. So again, just kind of a sampling of some concerns or issues that could come about.
Just to interrupt real quick, we do have a clear policy on that.
On the agenda creation?
Correct.
Yep, yep.
And if you guys are not aware, that policy is any two board members who agree they would like an item added to the agenda.
You make that request and it gets added, yeah.
We made that policy last year, 2 years ago.
Okay, good. Yep. So that, and then normally, because if you don't have that, and it's just the president, you get the bottlenecking then of if someone wants something and they get the veto, then you don't get that. So okay, that's good to know.
Motivation for creating that policy just like that to avoid
that issue. Yep. Okay, so that's good to know. So then you guys have the ability of 2 board members, as just stated, so understand that that's how that process can work. Okay, so again, just kind of working together. At the end of the day, just some of these again are practical, but frankly, admitting what you don't know is a very important one. I don't sense that that's an issue with this board, but again, it's something just to have at the back of your mind. All of us are coming to this with different life experiences and information. You can all play an important role in those various facets, but acting as though you know everything is one of the ways to walk yourself in the district into a really bad spot. Obviously, jumping to conclusions is another big one. Particularly when it comes to sensitive personnel issues or student issues, you're going to hear a lot of things in the community from people that you work with, you live next to, etc. They're going to have been playing the game of telephone. They may have the story right, they may not. But at the end of the day, come to the board meeting, hear out from everybody who's here and is going to be able to provide you information, whether that be staff or otherwise, and then make a measured judgment as to what's happening. Similarly, be very careful of making promises outside the board meeting. So again, you're going to have a lot of folks who know you're on the board. They're going to try to ask you for favors, whatever you want to call it. Yes, you can ultimately bring concerns and interests forward, again, to the board as a whole, but be very clear with them that you as an individual, frankly, don't even have the authority to do most of probably what they're going to ask you. And just explain to them as to how this process works. And frankly, again, have them come for public comment if it's something where they very, very much feel that strongly about it.
Brian, if you have concerns that are brought through the community, where on your agenda can you voice that?
Yeah.
Can we as a board, where can we voice that?
So there's a couple ways to do it. One, and I don't recommend this first approach just because it's so broad that I think you could walk into other problems in the open meetings that we'll talk about in a second. But certainly, I guess in theory, you could have a standing agenda item that would say, concerns from the community. I don't love that idea for the reasons I just stated. But you could also indicate, and again, it's a matter of timing. But let's say you get approached on a Wednesday by someone in the community, they got a concern that next Monday or Friday, whatever, you have a meeting. You could then, through you and one other person, make a request for a board agenda item to put that on the agenda and just, have it basically as a matter of discussion. And at that point, really all it is just saying, okay, I'm going to turn it over to the board president. She's asked for this agenda item because there's a person who expressed some concerns. And then frankly, the floor is yours at that point to say, yep, I spoke with so-and-so, or you don't even have to identify them, and talk about what the concern is. And then maybe it's the case that the board wants to have discussion. If there's action, that could be the case too. But that's how you set it up so that it's properly before you as board. And if there needs to be, again, discussion or action, you're not violating the open meetings law.
Or maybe an easier way is just to have them come in under public comments, make their comments, and then.
Yes, the only concern there, and again,
But we can't act on it, but they can talk.
exactly. I was going to say, so you can't act on it that night, and generally you can't respond either. So you can say, thank you, we appreciate it, and that may tee up a future board agenda item as well. But yes, that's another avenue.
Then it's coming directly from the person instead of being
Yep.
regurgitated and maybe misunderstood.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
although it's a hypothetical, that they can also probably refer to me too, correct?
Correct. Yep.
That's another strategy.
Absolutely.
If we put it on an agenda item, couldn't we invite the community member to be part of the discussion in the agenda item?
Yeah, as long as you agendize it correctly. So it's really the trap is just the public comment piece and making sure that you don't have them come up here, say something, and then you guys start engaging with them. That's the biggest no-no.
From a public comment standpoint.
Correct.
But if it was an agenda item
Then you'd be
and
fine.
they were called in as part of the agenda item,
Yep.
then that would be totally.
100%. Yep, 100%. So that's another option as well.
Thank you.
Yep. And I would say the only thing is being careful with that again, because if you make one exception for that, then you open the door. So not to say you can't do that, but it's kind of like public comment that, no good deed goes unpunished, I guess is what I would say. Okay, so another big thing here is that, and again, not suggesting you guys would do this, but these are things I've seen. Really avoid at any point in time pitting staff amongst one another with respect to whatever you guys may view as your political issues. So obviously, being on a board, it's politics are a little bit different than our traditional understanding of the term. But when we talk about your local, concerns, issues, whatever that might be, yes, you have them and you're fully entitled to it. I would just strongly advise you guys to not ultimately involve staff in those issues. And frankly, again, it may be that they approach you about things they know you're passionate about because they watch the board meetings. I would just, again, caution you to say, well, again, I appreciate you coming forward with this, but it's really probably best that you not get involved with this particular issue as a staff member. I will handle it on my own as a board member. Again, because basically at the end of the day, whether, again, they realize it, it's putting everybody in a bad spot if things particularly go south. Again, same with administration. Shouldn't assume staff are taking side, especially if they receive an answer from you guys that they feel that you're not taking, that they don't feel that it's in the side that they wanted or in alignment with the interests that they wanted. And so just really basically from Chris's standpoint, understanding that, and he knows this, you guys are going to make decisions that he's not going to like and vice versa. Okay, so just kind of a takeaway here, and we'll transition to the next section. So really, again, understand that you guys only have the powers under statute. Additionally, you as a board have many policies you've decided as yourselves you want to follow them, so understand you should therefore follow them, and also you can change them. So if at any point, as was mentioned you did a few years ago, something's not workable, you're running into issues, there are workarounds. And then lastly, just understand that you and administration, again, are here to work on the same team. You have different roles. They serve in the day-to-day operations. You guys are here on the policy. Okay, getting into the next section here. So really just kind of hit some quick hitters on the front end. The thing to understand as a board, if nothing else, is really from a policy standpoint here is why does the open meetings law exist? This should guide hopefully decisions that you guys make on all matters under the open meetings law. And basically, as you see here in statute, any case that you ever read on this issue is going to start by citing that essentially here in Wisconsin, we're what's called a blue sky state, and we favor heavily transparency. And so the presumption of public governance is that it be open for all people to see. That's where we start here in Wisconsin. And it's only if there are narrow exceptions that would be applied otherwise. And so as you can see, there's liberal construction by courts of this statute. So again, anytime you have a question in your mind of should we go into closed, are we in a meeting, you should be thinking of in favor of the law saying that it's the openness for the public to see it. So this is the important part as kind of we get into the technicalities here. So when we talk about the application of this law, it applies to government bodies. And that means not just you as a board, but it also really, really importantly means committees. And that means committees that you guys very clearly have as a board, but also committees that you might create as a board that would be staff run. So I don't know that you have any of these, but a few years back, there was a case up in Appleton. Basically, the board appointed a staff run committee, but it was board created to review various books and literature, etc. And the long and short of it is that there was a lawsuit because someone said, I want to attend those meetings and I want various minutes and information from those meetings. You're not putting agendas up, all the things that come with open meetings. And the district said, well, we're not an open meetings entity. It's not a board. It's not a board committee. It's a staff committee. There is not a single elected official on it. And so we don't have to comply with it. The long and short is the court said, no, that's wrong. When you read this statute, it is anything that is considered to be a board created committee, body, etc. So just understand that if you guys ever were to address the idea of a task force or anything like that, you can certainly do it, but you need to know the implications of it. It will be subject to the open meetings law. And so if it's a very sensitive issue, for example, I know some schools that have safety task force, that's generally going to be an issue that you may not want to have a board created body to do that type of thing. You can address it by asking Chris, hey, maybe you would look into creating some kind of thing. You could figure out what that would look like. And therefore you get around the issue and you have the same effect, but you're then not opening the door to the open meetings law. So again, just understand some of the ways in which you guys deal with these issues are going to matter as to the back end implications. Now, when we talk about the bodies that it applies to, the next thing you have to think about is, again, not only how was it created, but at the end of the day, what's the purpose of the body? Is it advisory or is it actually being created to have some kind of power? If it's ultimately advisory, then it may be that there are some additional limitations versus actual bodies that have authority, et cetera. Now here, all of your bodies are generally going to be some that have some authority, and thus you're going to have to comply with all aspects of the open meetings law. Next slide, please. Okay, so here again is kind of where the rubber starts hitting the road. So when we talk about what's a meeting, this is where you have to start thinking about, are we in the realm of the open meetings law? So there's what's called the Showers test here in Wisconsin, and basically there's two purposes to the test. The first is the whether or not a meeting has happened, and that looks to the purpose, but then it also looks to the number of people involved. So the first thing we look at, is the purpose. And so if the purpose was to exercise the responsibilities, authority, or duties that were delegated in the body, you are automatically then being viewed as having the purpose met. And then the second part is the number, and this is where you have to be particularly careful. If 1/2 or more of the members of the body, and again, this includes committees, it includes the board, are present in any particular area at the same time, it is a presumption by law that you are engaged in a purpose to engage in governmental business. So that first part of the requirement automatically kicks in when 1/2 or more of you are in a single room. So that's why, as you might have ever experienced, especially again if you've been on the board for a while, you go to a community event, maybe a local sporting outing or whatever it might be, or a theater event at the local PAC. You might post an agenda saying that the whole board is going to be there, but there's no intention to discuss any kind of governmental business. The reason for that is because you're trying to avoid a lawsuit that would ultimately be on a technicality that, hey, I thought the board was there and maybe they were talking about business and they were convening a side plan, et cetera, without us knowing. Likewise, if you guys are friends outside of this and you all hang out, again, at least enough of you in a number to constitute a quorum, or what's called a negative quorum, which we'll talk about in a moment, you have to be wary of this potentially as well. Because if you go to a bar, you're at a restaurant, you're all together at your house doing whatever, there's been cases out there where people file lawsuits over people watching Packer games together as a board. They weren't doing anything, but the challenge you have there is because the presumption exists, you are now having to prove a negative when and if you have that claim come forward. You have to show I wasn't doing board business, which obviously can be pretty difficult.
Ryan, with having 1, 2, 3 board members here with children in the district, and then 2 other active board members, sometimes it's by chance that there's at least 3 here.
Yeah.
Very frequently.
Yeah, Christmas play.
Say that again?
Very frequently.
Yeah.
Yes, very frequently, yes.
Pretty much every school event.
Yeah, is there a blanket statement we can give and then keep it posted all the time, which I believe we do now? Or is it better practice to just at every event possible say there could be a quorum?
So, I think if you wanted to be hyper technical, you could do the constant posting that's out there all the time. I also think I could see the DA or the AG taking a position to say, if you just have a constant posting, it kind of loses its effect at some point, because then you're just like, you read it, you move on. So I guess what I would tend to think is actually the more defensible approach is to say, if you guys show up for child pickup just by chance, that's, I think, very defensible. If you're at a school event, you knew you were going to be doing that, I think it's foreseeable. That's where I would probably, for every school event, just post something and say there might be a quorum. It's called a bad key notice, essentially. If you look at actually a lot of other agendas.
Does there have to be 24-hour notice?
Yes, yeah. And so that's where practically back to your original question, if just keeping a standing notice is better, you could do that too.
Well, I think it could be the do our best, but at least we have this as
As the
kind of a
backup.
backup. At least it's showing good faith intentionality
Yep.
behind adhering to the law.
Exactly. And
I don't
again,
wanna leave it at one up constantly.
That's correct, but just.
Well, if we're talking about protecting us, as far as I'm concerned, I disagree. If we're showing good faith and intentionality, we'll post it for every event.
There's posters that go up for each event, so on the bottom of that poster, can it be that it could be a quorum of board
Yep.
members in attendance, and that's all that would be necessary, but no business would be done?
exactly, that's
And
where you
then
put
we'd
it.
be covering it,
Yeah.
so if we could just add that language to our posters, maybe that might cover
But
it.
that doesn't go into the
Yeah, so the only thing is
traditional.
No, it still would have to go to, it would still have to go to.
your media
to the
outlet.
media outlet.
Yeah, because you got to do your typical agenda requirements. So you'd have to do at least. So at the end of the day, you probably just still post it practically where you put your agenda, so it wouldn't save you any heartache.
Okay.
So So yeah, that being said, obviously hyper-technicality as your lawyer, I'm not going to tell you not to comply with it, but I will tell you that it's a low likelihood of an issue to come up, but it's an issue that's out there. So anyway, the takeaway here at the end of the day is just understand you guys are getting together. This is something that could be.
Right, well, can we go back to that for
Yeah.
1 second? Would you suggest that the highest risk there is vindictive individual looking to seek out damaging the district?
That or, and it could be the same thing too, or a combination of these interests. I would say that's the scenario that I've seen it play out the most, or frankly, where there is truly a highly controversial issue in the district and someone truly believes that their board is just nefariously behind their back, like making decisions that are not being done in an open, transparent public like they're supposed to. So, and again, that could be the same thing where someone's mad at you and thus makes these assumptions. But those are the two instances where I've seen this come up and people genuinely have a concern over the fact that they believe it's the open government's being invaded. The other scenario, yeah, is often a spurned ex-elected official, citizen, whatever it might be.
Just to be clear, you said that if the three of us show up to pick up our kids randomly, that would
No, the post is every single day.
Right, but if it was a scheduled event.
So yeah, correct. And the reason I'm saying I don't think that that's practical is because, well, again, while I could say you have to do that to be hyper technical with the law, I would say that every time you guys show up to pick up your kids, there is, in my view, a default built-in argument that you are not. You could make the argument very easily that there's just no reason as to why we're here engaging in government business. Chance, right? It's a chance gathering. The fact that I came here at 3:55 and someone else is 3:56, it could have been completely opposite any given day. My wife could have come. And therefore a board member wouldn't be there. So the point is that you, I think, have very clear arguments in those scenarios to say, I had to pick my kid up. It was going to happen. The fact that we all were here in the hallway at the same time, there's no way we planned it. And frankly, you're also going to have a lot of witnesses to probably be able to say they'd never talked to each other once. If they did, it was, hey, how you doing?
It says here on the shower, it says it has to satisfy two requirements. So where I'm going with this is that the first one is the purpose to engage in government business.
Yeah, and so the problem is that there's a presumption that you were doing that when you're in there.
Yeah, and that was the previous slide that did say that.
Yeah. But to your point, and that's where I'm saying I think you have the argument is that I think you could plausibly tell the DA, the AG that we're not there to engage in government business. I'm there to pick up my kid. Where I have a much larger concern is where you're found huddling in the corner at a school event, where you're at a football game sitting in the stands together for the entire game, something like that, where it's a lot more question and a lot more time to defend.
When Amy and Ryan and myself were on board, because we were all on the football stuff.
Yeah.
So we had 3 board members.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, we
Every
posted
weekend we were
for all of them.
all the Saturday games we had, where Ryan, myself, and Amy Redmond were on the board of directors for the youth organization and the board here.
Yeah.
We posted every weekend to make sure that parents knew that
We
there was a
posted
high
for
probability that all 3 of us were gonna be in the same facility, board business wasn't taking place. but
Yeah.
Because of our dual roles in both boards, we would be at those places. So
Yeah.
We posted when we did all 3 of us doing the Santa game.
That's what I'm saying, we posted for the handing out candy, trunk or treat, and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
And frankly, I think the more you do that, the more it also provides a defense for the chance ones we're talking about to say, we're doing everything we can to do good faith compliance. I mean, we're not going to post for every single thing.
You missed one.
Yeah, exactly. That's so. One thing that's important to note is that, and again, just to kind of cover, you can go to the next slide, Chris.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good, you're good. But one thing that's important to note here that just to kind of show you the breadth of this is that, and again, I don't know that it would come up, but if you guys were, for example, to go to, let's say, a village board meeting here in town, and the village board was dealing with something that by chance, as a matter of authority, you guys would have coming back your way. And I realize there's probably very few things that this may satisfy, but where you run into this bad key issue, and actually where that came up, is that it was a case where board members from a school district or a village, I don't recall which, but they went to the other localities board meeting, and they sat there as observers. And basically, they didn't realize or think that there was any issue with that. The long and short of it is that the court ultimately said, well, sorry for you guys, whether you realize it or not, you actually had the authority at some point to deal with that issue later on. So the fact that you're sitting in the audience, gathering information about it, that was of relevance to your constituents. They should know that you're there, because ultimately, who knows what you might talk about, etc. So just throwing that out there again, just to indicate the breadth of this. And if you were to go to, whether it's a county meeting or a village meeting, there is potentially, again, probably not likely, but the probability, or the issue rather, of noticing it up and saying, hey, we're there, we're gathering information. So just have that on your radar. The other thing that's really important to understand is that when you talk about the numbers, it's an important thing to always kind of have in the back of your head as to what is in fact the right or wrong number. And when I talk about that, that comes back again to this issue of the quorum and also what's called a negative quorum. The reason that matters is because, again, of the whole bad key issue of are there enough people present to create a problem. Technically, if you have a negative quorum, it could also be the same issue where you can create what's called a negative walking quorum. And a quorum is obviously when you have enough people to take action on something. A negative quorum is when you have enough action to defeat something. And so there are certain actions where, for example, if you need a supermajority to pass it, having enough people to not be in favor of it, you can automatically therefore block it. That's called negative quorum. You have to be particularly careful there because, especially in the talking discussions outside of board meetings, if you have enough people in a negative quorum, create what's either called a tacit or explicit agreement to not do something, i.e. you say, hey, we're not going to vote to do whatever, we're going to block it, and you have that discussion outside of a board meeting. Should someone find out about that and file a complaint, you have a violation of the open meetings law. The other similar issue, which is more likely, is what's called a walking quorum, and that's the same exact concept, but just with regards to a quorum. So same example, but where you would have, for what's more common, maybe a point person, maybe the board president, whoever, and they would call each individual board member and they think, oh, I'm being sly, because I'm just going to ask each person, hey, if we brought this issue up at the board meeting, how would you vote? And everybody has a little pre-discussion, and then you come to the board meeting and the issue comes up, and sure enough, everybody votes that way. That's a classic walking quorum. That's a complete violation of the open meetings law. The theory being, of course, that you basically had the meeting outside of the meeting. And so the public wants to and needs to see that deliberation, that discussion. So those are the other two things that I think are going to be on the next slides here that we'll probably be able to breeze through, but are the big, frankly, issues in the open meetings.
Brian, go ahead, Jordan.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So obviously, the negative quorum here would be if somebody moved out of district, we're down to 4, right? So the negative quorum would be 2.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's say 2 of us attend the same place of worship every Sunday, and there was a vacancy on the board. Would we have to technically post that we're both going to be in the same place of worship every single Sunday?
So the only reason you would have to do that in that particular instance, and this is where unfortunately you and or the district would have to give some thought to future agenda items, would be if you know for a fact there's an issue coming up where it's a supermajority. And so therefore, if you could actually block every single instance, that's where you have to be concerned. So no, I don't believe that in that instance you would fall into many examples where there'd be a supermajority threshold for issues. It would still be a common majority. Now, where you might run into a problem is, well, what happens when there's a tie? And so I guess I'd have to look into that piece of it all. That might be where it gets a little more
Right, if
complex.
somebody were to step down from the board, now there's only 4 of us.
Yeah.
Technically, once a week, we're meeting outside of the board meeting. There's 2 of us in the same building.
Yep.
Room. That's fine.
Yeah, so that's where, frankly, to be cautious there, then yes, maybe ultimately given the size of the board, you would, if that's how you're going to do it, put up a notice to that effect. Again, it comes back to, are you going to be in the same room for how long, all those considerations. Based on your example, I probably would tend to put up a notice. What I'd also say is that, although you can't always control it, it's one reason as a board to try to work quickly to fill that vacancy, for what it's worth. Again, you can't always do that as fast as you'd like, but the less time you have for board members, the better for that.
Right, for negative quorum, let's say you have, a new president, vice president, is it acceptable for me to meet with both together, or would you recommend just meeting with them separate?
No, so you could meet with them together if you have 5 board members. Again, it's really only if you know for a fact on a future agenda, like, okay, we've got this issue, supermajority is coming up, we have to be concerned about it. Otherwise, that shouldn't cross your radar. So yeah, so you can go right through these next couple slides. They're going to cover what we just hit on of the walking quorum and the negative walking quorum. Yep. Perfect, right here. And so the last thing on the other slide, which you don't have to go back for, but that just to understand is that having an agenda item created. So we talked earlier about, hey, 2 members asking for an item in the agenda. That is explicitly recognized as not being a walking quorum. You're not talking about a substantive issue. You're asking merely to put something on an agenda that will then be discussed. So just to be clear, do not hesitate about reaching out and asking for agenda items like you talked about. That's completely acceptable. So ultimately here, just getting into some of the technological advances, this is where, again, you have to be cautious about, frankly, how it is you're communicating.
300 million.
To be as basically just kind of direct about it and avoid being in the weeds as much as possible. what all this is going to get to is that if you are having telephone conversations, if you are having text messages, if you are having email discussions, and all these things are happening with enough people in a manner that either constitutes a walking quorum or an actual quorum, that's where, again, you walk into all kinds of big issues from an open meetings perspective. I would tend to tell you that it's going to be email that will often be the biggest problem. And again, that's where you have the email that's sent out and you say, well, don't reply all. And of course, and now you have this big debate that ensues on the email. So my advice to all of you is that while there are certainly instances you'll send an email out, the reality of it is that if there's again going to be that debate or discussion, hold that till that meeting that comes up for when that discussion happens, because the last thing you're going to want is a public records request. And now it's very, very obvious as to what happened in the other complaint.
What about communications from Chris to the board as entirety? Should we just always be in the habit of just hitting reply, first reply all, so we're not just,
Yep.
again, caution more than anything?
Yeah, so if it's any substantive response other than, received or something, absolutely, I would recommend you just individually copy Chris, and then Chris can, basically what he can do is take the collective response message, whatever it may be, and then circle it back to the whole board and just say, all right, I've heard from everybody, and I just wanted to let you know that this is what I'm going to ultimately end up moving forward with, and or this is the consensus, whatever it might be. And yeah, that's totally appropriate. So that's the way to deal with those types of things. Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
You bet. So the only thing otherwise, just to note beyond what I referenced here, is that if you guys do get into the realm, and you obviously had to deal with it during COVID, of doing virtual meetings, telephonic meetings, the other big thing, just when we talk about those types of technologies to be wary of, is that the whole concept of a meeting is to be accessible to the public. And so if you have a virtual meeting where for some reason all of you weren't here, or you had a telephonic meeting, prime example for telephone would be that back in the day, they would say you should have the conference phone set up on a desk and basically have a room just like this where everybody from the public could come gather, and you may be having everyone else call in, but at least that way there's a public open space that you've made available for everybody to have the same access to. Again, virtual, back in COVID, it was the same thing. You put out a link, you might put it on your agenda. It allows everybody in the community to see the same space, be in the same space, etc. So just to the extent you guys find yourself ever using those technologies in the future for one reason or another, know that it has to be set up in that particular way. Okay, so you can blast through a few of these here. Email I hit on, so again, just be very, very careful with those. The long and short of it is that that is absolutely a meeting if you have enough communications in short periods of time. The quick war story here is the combination of the public records law and the open meetings law. Do not, or I guess backing up step, be careful rather as to if you're picking up your phone and texting in the meetings. And the reasons I say that is that it is going to be assumed, especially if you have members of the media here, that you are texting one another. What happened here in this story is, I would argue, kind of a war story and absurd. And I don't really feel bad for the members because they kind of brought themselves, but it was definitely embarrassing. Essentially, we had a City of Madison council meeting where they were well known to be just infighting with one another. There's one faction that was on one side, another faction that was in another. Sure enough, in the meeting, there's a member of the press out there, and they see people picking up phones left and right. They assume, I think they're texting each other. So they make a public records request to all the council members for their text messages. And sure enough, what you see here on the right side of your screen is what they get. So, for example, one of the older persons is caught saying, yeah, this meeting's so peaceful with Bridget not speaking to me. And another person goes on to say, I can't always carry it all on my shoulders. I've really done nothing but help. And, you have really no difference to silence, the idea of the difference for silence makes. So the point being is that not only was this embarrassing, they got dinged for an open meetings violation. The DA basically took the position, which I think was correct, to say you're having a meeting inside of the meeting. People who are there are supposed to hear what you're saying. I mean, in theory, you probably shouldn't be saying these things to each other in public, but if you want to say them, then you should say them openly. And so again, the point being, be very careful with instant messaging, text messaging, all the other things during the meeting. Whether you realize it or not, you're having a meeting inside of a meeting, and it creates all kinds of problems.
Speaking of war stories, I know in 1980, somebody opined about a telephone, which I appreciate. This is a really probably weird question. What if 3 board members reply to a social media post?
Yeah, so I would say that it's going to depend on the nature of the reply. Now, if you start engaging with each other,
That doesn't happen here. I've seen that in my previous district.
Yeah.
And when you brought up that story from 1980, it just made me think of, at that time, that was the appropriate discussion around that technology.
Yeah.
And here we sit now, there's a Facebook post that 3 people, there's a quorum of the majority. Just something, I don't know.
No, I mean, I think you have a very real problem potentially, especially again, if they're engaging with one another and you know, maybe they're having snipes across the bow and they're not really directly talking to one another. But to the extent that there was an arguable debate between the people,
Right.
I would say it's a meeting and I would say you got a real issue on your hands.
I mean, that's not like I heart something or
No, yeah.
thumbs up or
Totally, yeah,
an
totally
emoji.
different from that, yeah.
Big emoji guy. Huge emoji.
And so to that point, I mean, if you guys have strong opinions on something, I guess what I would ultimately say is you certainly can and should advocate for those, but I would say have your own page and put that position on that page rather than having that cross debate if that were to ever occur. Again, we have to make reasonable efforts for anyone who wants to be here for it to be open. That does, for better or worse, include photography and filming. So if you have people, which does not appear you do, but if you have people who are regularly going to be here and filming photography, the reality is that unless it's frankly disrupting the meeting, you have to allow it. Now, obviously, closed session, that's different. So that's not going to be a requirement. Another one here where just noting who can actually close a meeting. And again, the public generally does not have the right to open or close a meeting. It's the board as a whole that sets that issue. One unique exception is 1B of the open meetings law, which does allow technically an employee to open a meeting if it's a person of a teacher or administrator being terminated. Basically, it's a due process piece where the theory being if they want their day in court for the public, they can have that day in court. The thing really here to note is just at the end of the day, there's 13 different exceptions. I'm not going to run through all of them, but what you should just understand is that the most common ones are going to deal with personnel, deal with students, and maybe bargaining contract type issues where you're talking about negotiating with outside parties and not wanting to disclose really important details. Every now and then some legal advice may come about, but it's important there to understand you have to be either threatened to sue or actually undersued for me to come in and give you legal advice specifically under that exception. Again, there's other ways for that to happen with personnel, students, etc. But just note that those are the common issues. The other thing I would note here is that, again, as I started out, I'll end on this topic, which is that the law here is very favorable to openness. So you are to only really use closed sessions sparingly and only when necessary. And even in that respect, the theory should be that when you talk about a topic, if you can talk about some of it in open, some of it in closed, the law would favor you taking that approach at the end of the day. These are the reasons that are listed. Again, I won't go through all of them.
Should you always cite statute when you?
Yes,
Okay.
it's at least on your agenda. Now, there's kind of back and forth about, you'll hear in meetings, people actually read the whole thing and taking the motion. I think there's different schools of thoughts on whether you just refer to the statute itself there, but on your agenda, absolutely, you should always be referring to the actual statutes. The other big thing on your agendas as well is to note that you want to make sure that the agenda reads in a way, with closed session in particular, that it's obvious to the public what we're talking about in a certain respect. Obviously, you have to be guarded with closed session because it's being closed for a reason. But a common example with staff might be talking about a specific personnel issue. That would be what you would note as the kind of comment for why you're going into closed. It is not sufficient enough to just cite I'm going into close under 1C or 1B of the statutes. You have to give a very short narrative as to specifically this is the reason why we're going into close. Okay, so at the end of the day, the other really important thing to understand is when you're in closed, you're in closed. Again, I don't sense you guys have an issue with this, but it does come up often enough it's worth hitting. At the end of the day, just understand there's a really important reason as to why you utilize closed session. It's usually because you're talking about reputational issues. You're talking about confidentiality issues with students. There's again, a rationale behind it. Often as well, it could be rumor, it could be innuendo, it might be pre-investigation. If you were to then go out into the public and spew these things and they get out, the reality of a defamation lawsuit is very real. And unfortunately, when I referenced earlier that when you get sued in an individual capacity, often it's not a personal issue. Defamation is one of those exceptions. So you should be very careful when it comes to closed session to treat it as seriously as it needs to be treated. As my coworker says, if you need a friend to talk to, get a dog. Otherwise, closed session should stay in closed session. So that's pretty much my take on that. So with public records here, we'll transition and I'll kind of hit these high points for you. I know this is going a little long, but this is an important one. Public records, whether you know it or not, you are in fact all office holders and thus have responsibility over your own records. So it's important to understand, therefore, what do you need to do with records. What I would say is that it's going to be easiest more often than not if you ever get a request to work with both Chris and or the district to help you with IT pieces of it, production. But you do by statute have responsibility to make disclosure decisions and to work through the process. So with that being said, very much like the open meetings law, here we are a blue sky state. As you can see, I won't read it to you, but really all this says is that only in the exceptional cases can we deny access to a record. That should be your presumption every time you get a records request, and then you work backwards from there to figure out if there are exceptions that exist. The only three reasons by which you can withhold information, and this is critical, is first by statute. So if a statute says you cannot turn something over, there are very limited issuances of that. So FERPA is an obvious example. Otherwise, in Chapter 19, there's about a list of 13 of them. Again, very sparing, not as many as you might otherwise think. The next source is what's called common law or case law. So if a court has come out and said, yep, in this particular area, you do not release, or you have the ability to not release that, that's another example where you may not have to turn it over. An example there is personally identifiable info of victims or witnesses who are involved in sexual harassment investigations in the workplace. The last one is public policy balancing test. This one is a little bit wonky and confusing because it's what's really at the end of the day called a discretionary decision. There's nothing in this concept that ever says you have to withhold or redact something. This is where the law tries to give you guys some leeway to say, if you think that the public interest in reviewing this information is actually outweighed in this one narrow instance because whatever's here is so damaging or harmful that actually the public wouldn't want to see it, you can make a discretionary argument to say, I'm not turning this piece of information over for these various reasons. That one you want to be careful with because when you make that decision, it is truly you going out on a limb to a certain degree and saying, I believe that this is so important that I'm going to make my own argument and kind of cite to various sources of the law to bolster that essential consensus. So an option, but one to be wary of. The next thing that is important for your purposes, just understand the definition of a record. It's extremely broad. At the end of the day, the easiest way to think about it is if you have anything in your possession relating to district business, it's a record. And that is regardless of location. That includes on your personal accounts and your personal devices, etc. And so at the end of the day, the reality of it is that where you keep these records, how you engage in district business is very important. And I'll cover that in a little while. But the reality is that, again, when we talk about what's a record, basically most everything is going to fall under that if it relates back to district business. One of the few exceptions, and I don't want to oversell this, so be very careful with it, is there are things called drafts and notes. And so it might be in every now and then that you have the ability to claim what I have in my possession is a draft or it's a note. That's one of the two things that are not considered a record. Just very quickly, a draft is essentially, for example, something where the board as a whole, or maybe one of you would come up with a preliminary document. You review it, you share it within this cohort. It goes nowhere else outside of here, and you decide for some reason as a board, we're never going to review it and act on it. If you just kind of looked at it, decided it, throw it out the window, and we all move on. That is a draft because you never actually used it for its commissioned purpose. And it was kept within a very small group of people, the people that it was commissioned for. That's a very important set of rules if you're going to use what's called a draft. Simply throwing draft watermarks on documents does not get the job done. Notes, similar concept where very strict requirements. This one's even more strict where basically there's two requirements here. The first is that if you create a note, you truly cannot share it with anyone, not even me. It has to be kept to you and you only. And ultimately, the second requirement is that it has to be created for solely refreshing your recollection later about that matter. Compare that to the purpose of creating a document to memorialize an official action. So a common example I give to give you some practical application of this is an investigation report versus notes you take during an investigation. It is very common for me to work with clients where you have the person who does the investigation, they take their own notes during the process. There's a lot of sensitive information in there, maybe some personal insights that they wouldn't want in a report. It's very rough in nature. They will keep those notes and later then look at them as they draft the final report solely to say, you know, what did that person say when I talked to them, et cetera, et cetera. They will then never share those notes with anybody else and keep them in their own file. They also, though, have them that formal report that everybody can review and see. That is the way in which you can keep notes as long as you treat them appropriately and understand the role and the purpose of them. So to the extent you guys as board members, for example, would sit here this evening and take personal notes, as long as you were to keep them for yourself, never share them, that's a classic example of what I'm talking about.
You're saying not even share with legal counsel?
Correct. Yep. So getting into the requests themselves, a couple of misnomers just to dispel, they don't have to be in writing. So if you have someone who comes up to you in the public and they ask you verbally for something, you do have a duty to treat that as a records request and to act on it. So don't take the bait in thinking that if somebody asks you for something, we have no obligation to deal with it. Another big one that comes up that's a misnomer is that the person does not, unless their identity is necessary to get them the records back to them, which it often is not, they don't have a duty to tell us who they are. As you probably may have experienced, the reality of getting anonymous requests is just growing. It's very high. And so, it would not be uncommon for you guys to get a completely anonymized email where someone's asking for a set of records. You have a duty to treat it like any other request. I would say every now and then we get questions from clients about IT concerns, and I would say that yes, every now and then there might be a legitimate one, but unless you can actually articulate and identify that, you have to view the request as legitimate and valid.
This is mirrored after FOIA.
That's exactly right,
I
yeah.
do that all the time.
That's exactly right, yeah. This is the state version of FOIA, yeah.
So are you able to charge them for?
Yep, and then, exactly, yep, and I believe I'm getting to that, and if I don't, I'll hit it now just to make
Okay.
sure I do. So yes, when we talk about requests here, there's the concept of fees, and what I'm here to tell you is that you should absolutely every single time charge fees for anything you can, and I'm not saying that because you want to be greedy. What I'm saying that is because you have to spend real time and resources fulfilling these records requests. Your staff will have to fulfill real time and resources putting these requests together. I'm talking hours and hours of time sometimes. And so in instances, for example, there's a concept called location costs. And so in those instances, let's say someone asks for, hey, I want every single disciplinary document ever issued to someone. Well, to find that, we're going to have to go through every single personnel file. And some people may have discipline, some people may not. So it's not even to say that I can go through, every single file in this position and I'm going to find it. You literally are going to have to look through every single record that's in the personnel file. In that particular case, that's called location time because you have to look through all that stuff to figure out, do we even have anything responsive to the request? You can charge for every single minute of that time as long as it exceeds $50 or more of staff time, which it almost always will. And you can charge for the actual cost of the way it's phrased is the lowest paid, most qualified employee. And sometimes that's going to be Chris, sometimes it's going to be an executive assistant. It may just depend on the issues at hand and where the information is stored. But it's not uncommon that I work with districts and they have IT folks, and in your case, an outside IT vendor, who charges a very high hourly rate. And they say, well, for me to even do this email search, we're talking 3 hours and I charge $100 an hour. So in that case, I would recommend, and clients often do charge the person asking for the request and say, yes, we're happy to proceed, but understand that, and this is the next important piece, you have to give us what's called prepayment of these fees. And if you give us that money, then we will proceed with looking for it. And that's the other big thing. You don't have to do this, but I recommend it that you don't proceed with the request until you get the money. You can do it and then ask for money on the back end, but obviously every now and then, especially if it's a large fee, the person will ghost you and now you've done all the work and you get none of the money.
So
Please
does that
note
have
to
to
the,
be,
no, go ahead.
does that have to be part of our policy that we have to charge up front? And if the fees aren't, because otherwise is it not that you're not fulfilling the open records request?
I think I can answer that.
Okay, go ahead.
I can't review the policy. Our policy does have to have fees included.
Okay.
But what Ryan just articulated is exactly how, I can only speak for myself, how we behave moving forward.
Good.
So there's always that request for prepay. CompuNet has their location costs. We look at redaction costs and time to process. And then that is submitted on the front end with a request for dollars or reimbursement.
What's the
Right.
timeline to get back to the person? How long do you have?
Yep. So ultimately, at the end of the day, there's no strict requirement. Of course, DOJ, what they say is that 10 days is for a normal routine one, but they don't set that that's actually a standard. So it's always case by case, basically. And frankly, that can always come back to a number of things where, for example, if that person is a serial requester, the DOJ has said in certain instances that it's reasonable to put their requests on the back burner while you deal with other people's requests.
Is
So
there a timeline to just respond to them initially?
yeah, so not required, but my practical recommendation, what I say is just send them an email or a letter, whatever it is, right away, just to say, got your request, working on it, and that'll keep them at bay so they know you're not ignoring them. Yeah. Yep.
Can I back up just a bit to
Yeah.
the point that you made about treating verbal requests the same as written requests? I would imagine that there could be some discrepancy in well, no, I asked you for emails and video. I don't remember you asking for that. How does that get worked out?
So, and that's the same way with actually this issue here, and so it's a great question in terms of timing. What I recommend is that in some instances, your best way of dealing with some requests is that you are gonna be left with having to make a judgment call. And in your example, it's not that you're making a judgment call, but the way I deal with the judgment call is the same way I deal with that, and that is to put in the letter back to them, hey, or in this instance, probably to avoid wasting time in your response of, hey, I got your request. Say, hey, so-and-so, I just wanna let you know, I'm confirming I talked with you today at the grocery store, and during that discussion, you asked me for X, Y, and Z. If I missed anything, please let me know. That way you've locked them in essentially, and if you did miss something, it's not on you. They've got an opportunity to tell you, oh, you missed something, and I actually would like this other item.
Translate the verbal request into a.
Exactly. Just memorialize it, put it in writing, and say, we'll be following up with you, but it's it's out there, and that way you avoid that miscommunication.
Yeah.
And also to the question just asked, you avoid the, well, I asked you about it 3 weeks ago. No, it was last week that I saw you. It really hasn't been that long. So kind of putting a marker down in that respect as well.
Can we, given the verbal request, can we still direct them to go through the administration for that same request, or do we have to act on it?
So it's not that you can't, but I'd be careful about telling them they have to go through Chris. How I would do it instead is to say, I'm going to refer this to our district administrator, so you would just do it yourself.
Okay,
So you can absolutely do that, but I would just say, listen, this is something where we're gonna have to involve IT, various resources, so I'm gonna have our district administrator, Chris, work with you on this. If I need to be involved, I will, but absolutely, that's totally fine. And that's a great point as well. Sometimes, just for what it's worth, you'll get requests for things that are on your website as tempting as it may be to just send them the link and say, here it is. You actually do have to download the copy of whatever they're asking for and give it to them. So that's just another kind of classic example within line of what you said of just being careful there. Again, likelihood of an issue being raised low, but if you have someone who's spiteful or wants to create a problem, that's a classic way of which that's going to result in one. The other big thing here is specificity. So this is a common way in which you guys are going to have basically some tools at your disposal. Understand that by law, someone has to ask for a request that's considered reasonable as to scope and time. So if someone's asking, for example, for something that has no time limitation to it and it's extremely broad, it's the subject matter, there's very likely the ability to, at a minimum, ask them to clarify and narrow the scope of it. You may even be able to just say, we're not going to go ahead and request or to deal with this request whatsoever. Definitely be careful in that regard because the breadth of what is acceptable is larger than you might think. But what I often recommend is that, again, if you think there's the possibility for that, have Chris work with the requester on that issue. And the ideal approach at the end of the day, from my perspective, is to take a kind of 1-2 step with them and say, we think your request is overly broad. You could definitely narrow it. Here's how. Give us some search parameters. Tell us maybe some other locations you want to find. On the other hand, you don't have to do that. And if you don't, here's this prepayment request that we'd like you to then pay us, and then we'll go ahead and get it filled. 9 times out of 10, they say, yeah, I'd really rather not pay that exorbitant amount. I'll work with you and narrow the request, and you get where you need to go. So practically speaking, that's how I would deal with these issues. Timing is just asked, again, big one. So there is no specific timeline set, but generally, as I said, again, they typically would say about 10 business days is what you're looking for. So again, that being said, what you'll find in a lot of the requests you get is people like to throw at you, hey, as you probably know, DOJ said this. And again, as I said, it's just a guideline. So don't take the saber rattling for anything more than what it is. Likewise, as to the fees issue, you may very well get a request, particularly from the media, saying, I'm doing this in the greater public interest, and can't you just waive the fees? Again, I would say no to that, because at the end of the day, you start making exceptions in one realm, where do you draw that line? And again, what I'd also just say from practical experience is that the media is probably one of your more often requesters, and thus the more likely generator of cost for you guys. So practically speaking, you're just going to be shooting yourselves in the foot there. If you deny a request, this is critical. You have to deny it in writing, okay? So even if it's a verbal request, we cannot give a verbal denial, nor would you want to, for all the reasons that you alluded to, because you don't want that deniability of, well, you guys said this, but you said that. The other really important thing, though, is that the denial has to be specific and sufficient, and you get one kick at the cat here. Meaning that, again, to give that denial letter, often if you read one that I put together or other lawyers have put together, you'll fall asleep halfway through. It's everything in the kitchen sink in it. You do that for a reason, because if you have to go to court, you're basically reserving every possible argument that you would want to make before a judge. If it's not in the letter, you don't get to bring it up in court. It's waived. So for your purposes, understand that if you're denying a request, it should have a lot of thought put into it, even if it feels way over the top. Because on the off chance someone makes an issue of it, you want to be able to have that argument in court. Now, as far as denying the request, some other thoughts here is that if there are no responsive records, so there's just nothing that the person asked for, you don't technically have to respond. Now, what I would say to the question earlier is just practically, I would tell them, listen, we don't have anything. Reason for that is because even though you don't have to respond, what you're going to get in reality is someone coming back and being all pissed off that, well, why didn't you respond to me? You're ignoring me. And it just takes care of the issue immediately if you say, listen, we looked into it. We didn't find anything. Sorry.
Example of that.
Yep.
Within the last 2 weeks, Ryan and I worked on a situation in November. I have his language, I use it, everything he's talking about, we adhere to. This example, we recently had a request to share all of the examples of us celebrating and supporting Ramadan. So there's no record that required. That was an example of there's no responsive records exist.
Yeah, and sometimes, again, that's
Good
helpful
example,
too.
bad example, it's just one
No,
reason.
that's exactly it. Yeah, and again, it's helpful often just to tell them that, because otherwise they're going to be left sitting there thinking, wondering, and not knowing. The other big piece here on redaction is that when you deny a request, the law, as I mentioned at the beginning, is very specific on you have to give as much as possible. So when you redact, if you redact, only redact what you have to, leave everything else. Common example would be you have a social security number you take out, that's what's on the document. You don't black out the whole page, you just take out the social security number, everything else remains. That's very important because even, for example, in attorney-client privilege emails, the courts have come down and said that generally, yeah, you black out the body of the email, maybe the subject matter if it identifies the discussion, but the to and the from, the date, the time, that's not privileged, you turn that over. It's useful, I mean, one could argue, but technically it's part of the record, courts say you turn it over. And lastly on this, very importantly, because this is one I've seen people got dinged for repeatedly, anytime you make a denial, that last bullet point, that language needs to be in your response. If you do not have it, that's a per se violation of the law, and you will, if someone challenges it, automatically have attorney's fees awarded to the other side. So very big technicality, but a huge one nonetheless. You have to let the person know that they can challenge your partial or full denial of their request. If you say there are no records responsive, that's not a denial. You don't have to include that language, just to be clear. And same with, just for clarity too, if a prepayment or you're asking for clarification, I always put in there to be clear that I'm not denying your request. Therefore, understand we just want you to pay us or clarify. So that's, again, just a key thing there. I mentioned earlier, if part of the record is disclosable, disclose it. Additionally, the other piece of it is that if there's confidential information and we think that we have to turn it over, just because it's burdensome, that's not a basis to not turn something over, nor is just simply saying it's confidential. I think I made that clear already, but you have to cite specific reasons, specific laws, and give reasons behind those laws as to when you redact things. The big thing here as well is that when we talk about redaction time, you cannot charge for redaction time. So you can charge for location costs, you can charge for reproduction time, and you can charge for computing costs. But if it's actually just redaction, we have to be careful as to it's charging for that time in terms of costs there. And so, again, just understanding that when we break out the various pieces of a request, understanding where are we at, what steps to be taken, that's going to help structure your prepayment letter. The other big thing there, and you don't need to go back, no, you're good, is just to know you don't have to create a record. And again, this is a big one I've seen a lot of schools get. Oftentimes, and probably Chris more than you guys would get it, but you'll get this like outside request from some unknown third party that's asking for every vendor contract you've ever entered into with this, that, and the next detail. And you look at it and you think, I don't think we even have a single record that would have every piece of that information in it. That's so oddly specific. And often that's the case, is you don't. You don't have to create that record, and that's the response a lot of districts will give, is to say thank you, but we have no such record and we're not going to create one. So just don't fall into that trap. If someone comes to you and is asking for a very detailed set of information, it's truly only if you have a record or set of records that would provide that you have to respond with that information. The other one here, just very quickly, just so you know about it, is the duty to notice. So very limited reasons in which you notify someone, but for your purposes, you should just know that as elected officials, and Chris falls in this category too, is technically a local public office holder. that all of you guys are entitled to what's called an augmentation notice if and when a records request goes or comes into the district for a record of which you are the subject. Now, that's just a big fancy way to say you get a right for 5 business days to review the record and put something in writing if you think supplementation is warranted. The reason that's relevant is because by law, then anytime the district would release that record, they have to give that supplementation out to the requester as well. Basically, it's your way of saying, you know, I think this is incorrect, it's incomplete, there's some context missing, whatever it might be, and you get that chance. And so just understand that if you get a notice, it's not because you did anything wrong, it's not because you did anything one way or the other, it's just because of your position, and the district has to fulfill that. So whether you choose to put something in writing is totally up to you. You don't have to, but it's just something that you have to be made aware of if there is that type of request. And then the only other thing worth noting that, again, if you have these records, you'd want to be wary of it, is that disciplinary records and investigation records of employees have special notice obligations as well. So if you have those type of records, I suspect often Chris would get those requests, but if you do have them, you'd want to make sure before you release them to the public or the district does that you follow what's called the Woznicki notice process. And basically, it's just a matter of giving the person notice. Formally, they get 12 business days to review and possibly challenge the court the release. And if they challenge, the whole thing gets on pause so you resolve it. But if they don't, you then release the records.
If we request, I'll use myself, if I request information, do I have to go through an open records request as a board member also?
So it's going to depend, frankly, on how you guys choose to do that, and also to your exact point of what's the context in which the request is. So I often will view, if you truly are getting the information as the board member, and it's with the understanding that it truly is going to be kept in-house here, that you're not going to be going around sharing it, bringing it home, all those various things, then yes, at the end of the day, getting that information very directly without being a public records request, totally fine. On the other hand, where if you are starting to treat those records, even if for your formal board purposes, much more like public records, where you're keeping them, bringing them with you, all that stuff, and they're a little bit more loosey-goosey with the possession of them, that's where I'd probably be a little more cautious and do the more formalized public records request. But yeah, it's just really all going to come back to the reasons why you're getting them and how you're going to go about using them. The other thing I would note to that point too is that if you ever want to review records too, there's nothing that stops you guys from coming into the district offices and sitting down and looking at records either. That's another way just to work around that whole issue without being concerned about the public records law and things of that nature. Really here, just without getting into the minutia, this is all just stuff you want to make sure you file for technicalities or specific notice processes. You have to make sure you get notice personally or via certified mail, etc. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is really just at this point cutting back to the original point we started with, which is just to say the records law is extremely broad. Here, my main point is that if you guys are using personal devices and accounts for any board business, don't, in the sense that you're opening yourself to then the district in some instances, unfortunately, having to maybe look at those various accounts and devices. Now, to be clear, that's not necessarily true if you have every single communication that you've engaged in on a backup. So for example, some people have a Gmail account that they use, but then every single Gmail they send and receive also goes to their district email. You now have an original record on district servers of every single communication. So that's totally fine, but not everybody does that. And so if you guys are texting each other, if you're sending emails, Facebook messages, etc., in theory, those are all records, and that matters for 2 reasons. One, you have retention obligations over them. Technically, if you don't have a change in your schedule, which I assume you don't, for your record retention, it's a 7-year period often by default. And so I suspect you probably wouldn't be keeping a lot of those things for 7 years. So just understand you do need to. And then likewise, should you get a request for those items, if that's the only spot it's located in, you would have to then go find it, provide it to the district for review and or review it yourself and possibly disclose that item. So just understand that this misnomer of, hey, it's my personal cell phone or account, it does not apply. If the reality is we're talking about government business, it's a record and we may have some disclosure obligations. Again, my biggest concern is that I feel for the privacy issues of you guys of not wanting people to look through your personal accounts and devices. And again, the easiest way to avoid that is just have everything, even if you use a personal account or device, forward it to an official district server so you've got that record memorialized.
You can CC your board email.
Exactly. Yep. That's an easy way to get around that problem too. Yep. And that way, again, you can just ask Chris, hey, someone asked for this email. I know that there's an original on district server. Can you search for it and pull it? So much, much easier for everybody. basically, and I won't go through this, these cases just tell us that although Wisconsin's not dealt with it, we've got 3 or 4 different cases across the country where they look at laws very much similar to what we have in the public record realm, and every single court concludes what I just said, which is that if you're texting, you're sending emails, you're sending messages, it relates to record or businesses as usual, it's a public record. So the point being is that I think very persuasively this is where the law would head. You can just go through the next 2 here. So yeah, so what do we do to the extent you're using personal devices and government accounts? Do it if you can to avoid using them. If you are using them and you can't avoid it, again, then send those various records to another account for backup purposes. And then really just quickly here, social media problem. At the end of the day, just understand that if you are going to have a personal page for social media purposes, that you may have to be wary of, again, public records issues there. Those are potentially public records related to your office. So if you are then therefore going to next close that page off, you could be creating some problems for yourself on that realm. Also on the First Amendment piece, be very careful on turning your page off or restricting access, deleting comments. There is developing case law out there that basically says whether you realize it or not, you're creating a public forum on your page, and people have a right and desire to come onto that forum and debate the various viewpoints. And if you as a board member say, you know what, I really don't like that Bob is or John or Sally or whoever is going out there and dissenting against my particular view, removing them from my page, that is classic viewpoint discrimination, and it's a violation of the First Amendment. There's a lot of, like I said, cases out there. President Trump, for example, got sued over Twitter, which actually was a very interesting case, and then all he did was mute the people. He didn't even block them. And the court said even that was enough to be a First Amendment violation because they couldn't see and regularly engage as everybody else would. So you have to be careful when we talk about First Amendment issues on social media. Any questions? So I threw a lot at you guys. I know you've asked questions along the way, but I would be remiss if I didn't pause for any last minute questions. All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate your patience and sticking with me. Yeah, you bet.
Thank you for being so thorough, right?
Absolutely.
That's very good.
All right.
On to,
Oh, sorry.
sorry.
Go on.
On to 10 reports, the district administrator.
Yep, just a referendum update. June 10th is getting close. So something to consider as we move forward. This space will not be available in June, July, or August. So we'll have to relocate our board meetings and our annual meeting. But just a couple updates. We had a remaining contract price. We had $537,062 that we aligned with the current goal of the referendum, that because we came in under bid. Those items would include fixing and repairing the water leak in the basement, which has been chronic. Also updating the heating and cooling down there. There might be some sort of abatement for some asbestos, not major down there, but that'll be done. New carpet in this room, new ceiling tiles, some updates to the counter and the circulation desk. In addition, painting the gymnasiums and some of the brick around to update and freshen the look. We're going to also add some additional keyless door access and digital door access. So just some of those. Those bids came in slightly over, and PSI said that they would take that out of their profit to ensure that we can continue to move forward. Furniture purchase, the furniture price came in under about $25,000 less. The remaining dollars will be invested into the library, so we're excited about that.
For all classrooms are, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm confused about one part here, from 1 to 2. Have they given us a cost sheet yet that shows us how do we have a remaining contract? The remaining contract price, the $573.62 was over by $9,000, and we're having those costs waived, but the furniture came in $25,000 under.
Yeah,
What am I
so
missing?
because what PSI did, this is prior to me, they pulled that $450,000 out as a separate item, although it's all
For the
in the same
furniture.
referendum for the furniture. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So when they look at it,
We handled that.
because we handled that independently, that was not a PSI item. That's a good question.
Understood.
Yeah.
And does that, the furniture, that includes every classroom has will have updated furniture.
except for teacher desk, that was not included in the
Right.
new
that was
cost,
an
but everything
agreement.
else, yes.
Right, oh, good.
Including the library, we expanded, it wasn't originally included, there were, the art room wasn't included. And so we somehow just got missed, so we added that, so
That's a good room.
that was added. We expanded the scope, I don't want to say scope, but the vision for the middle school commons area to make sure that's more of a functional space. So there were some, key elements that we added, and I appreciate Brett Brenner and Jody, who did a great job of getting us the best price. So now what to do with the rest of it? If you know anybody who's looking for used office furniture, let us know. There might be a fire sale. So, interest on the investment, as you know, the referendum dollars went into an account in CDs. Year to date, or last year plus this year to date, the interest has been $67,254.56. And then just one last note, the district calendar was set up where we got done with school on the 8th, and teachers were asked to come back on the 10th. In talking with PSI, they would prefer that's not the case because they're coming in pretty aggressively. So we are working with our staff, those 8 hours. This has happened in other districts. They've worked a way to flex those 8 hours. So we are creating a spreadsheet. Teachers will sign up, add their additional hours with the goal of getting everybody out of here before the contractors come in and start doing demo and whatnot. So I just wanted to be public in case, make sure everybody knows that they're still fulfilling their necessary contractual requirements. We're just finding a different way to do that. So that's the referendum update. And then we are obviously going through all renewals. And I just wanted to make note that we're investigating some possible changes. We're listening to multiple people on our property casualty insurance broker analysis. I gave you a little example on that. So if you have any questions, you can ask me about that. So just looking to get the best price and service for our district.
Any other questions or comments for Chris? So we'll move on to board celebrations. I'd like to start, I'm going ahead instead of back. Mrs. Strasser, I know you have your performances, so can you tell the board when those will be?
So we have Friday, we'll have one during the school day for the kids, and that will be at about 1:45. And then we'll have our evening performance at 6. And then on Saturday, it will be 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock.
Thank you. And then I also know on Thursday, we have the expo going on.
Yeah.
From 5 to 7?
Yep.
Right, is that right? Okay. And they're showing project-based learning?
Yep.
It's similar to what they had earlier. That was very
Grades
interesting.
5 to 8.
If you have a chance to come in and see that, it's quite exciting for the students. I was really taken back when I came the last time when it was during school hours. So it's really fun to see their excitement and what they're learning out there. And then we have a band performance coming up in May, soon in May. I'm not sure the date.
Monday, the 4th.
Monday the 4th, okay. So those are all celebrations. I know I'm moving forward instead of backwards, but I like to celebrate ahead too. So, anyone else?
I've got 3. I want to celebrate Chris Sue. I love the new format of monthly financials.
Thank you.
Me too.
Glad to hear that.
Much easier to digest and read. And
Vicky wanted to go back. She liked the previous one,
Yeah.
so we just.
I think it's well done. I like that. I wanted to recognize Dennis Barkow for the work that he did
Yep.
on the E-rate documentation. We talked about it a little bit, but just that's not easy to put all that information together. It was really helpful. And I was also able to attend Deputy Friendly's safety poster contest at the Brock Stop, where we were represented by 2 4th grade students who got bikes, and it was a lot of fun to see, not just Riverview's posters, but all the schools in the area. their safety posters. That was fun. So I want to recognize Ellie and Wyatt, our two fourth grade students.
That's cool. Any other celebrations? Okay, seeing none, our next future meeting will be May 26th. So I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Adjournment by Vicky, second by Mike. All in favor? Adjourn at 8:07.
I need some